Good morning. Good morning and welcome to Fountain Street Church. Gosh, it's been so long I almost forgot what to say. Oh my Lord. Welcome to Fountain Street Church. I'm Reverend Christopher. I'm the senior minister here, and it is a joy to be with each and every one of you. We are well into the summer series at this point. We only have 2 more Sundays left in the summer series after this. I think the Religious Services Committee is kind of breathing a sigh of relief at that, though they've had a wonderful summer. And it is so wonderful to have Ruth Stein with us today. Will you help me welcoming Ruth? Thank you. I have been looking forward to this Sunday for a while. We are also so grateful to have Pletcher with us today. And I was so out of the loop that I had forgotten this exciting fact for today. I was thinking, well, you know, it's a choir member. They always rally and turn out for their own when they speak. So there'll probably be some choir members here. I forgot we have a choir today. So welcome and thank you to the choir. It's good to see you populating the front rows again. It's always a good feeling. So thank you to the choir and to Margi Peterson for making that so. I look forward to hearing them. As we get ready for this time of worship with one another, I want a simple invitation for each of us. And it's brought on by some personal things and also by the company I keep up here. All 3 of us are going through some immense challenges in our families' lives, health, and the changing of seasons. And so it is a miracle that we all ended up here this morning together. That a miracle. And also it is here that we come to get strength from one another and support and to rekindle the light within ourselves. And so in that spirit, I invite you to hear this reading as our invitation to worship. At times, our own light goes out and is rekindled by the spark from another person. Each of us has cause to think with deep gratitude of those who have lighted the flame within us. Welcome to this time of lighting the flame within ourselves and one another. Welcome to worship. We will continue with worship by our gathering hymn. You can find it in your hymnal.
Just saw my sermon fall to the floor. I'm really hoping it's still in order. So I thought, just as a quick little update for all of you, I know that a bunch of you are concerned or going to ask me in a little while about Jeff, so I'm going to save time and tell you right now how he's doing. So for those who don't know, I'm married to Jeff Kempter. He's a member of the governing board, and he's a member of the choir, and a longtime Fountain Streeter. And he has been treated for the last month at the University of Chicago Hospital for his multiple myeloma. He's been getting a treatment that involves genetically modified cells, and hopefully is going to be a treatment that's going to be a long-lasting thing for him, give him several years without any kind of chemo and all that sort of up and down that comes with that. But the process can be pretty debilitating. And fortunately for us, it has not been terribly debilitating, at least so far. So he's doing really well. Most of his labs are really good. There's a couple that were still, and his white cell count is still pretty much in the toilet. So we don't anticipate him singing in the choir, say, in September, maybe October, maybe November. We'll see how that goes. But so you'll see him in a mask and all that sort of thing. But we also get to come home from Chicago on Friday. So we are grateful for that because it's a little bit of a strain being both places. Anyway, so now to my reading, which is from the ABC News Policy Handbook. This particular edition is 1994, and what I'm going to read to you was written by Rune Arledge. We were convinced that Rune, when he came to ABC, was going to the news division, was going to ruin journalism for all time because he was a sports guy, and he didn't understand us. Nevertheless, the policy handbook. This is a substantial thing, and it tells us what we can do in the news division, and we're not alone. Right? Here's the New York Times. Here's AP. These are not very current anymore because they're all online these days, and I've read all of these things cover to cover more than once, just FYI. Anyway, so here's what Rune Arledge had to say about how journalism should be practiced at ABC. This is the third edition of the ABC News Guide to Policy and Procedures. Every editorial employee of this division will be given a copy. It is important. It is not a prescription for action in every circumstance. The reason you're here is because we think you know something about journalism and don't have to be told everything. But this guide will introduce you to the best ways we have found to deal with some common problems, the laws and procedures that are peculiar to broadcast journalism, and above all, to a way of thinking about fairness and good sense. These things are taken together will give you protections that are essential in a litigious society. But we are part of a great tradition, and this book derives its strength from that. When the first edition was published, ABC News was a shadow of what it is now. We did about 15% of today's programming. We had between a quarter and a third of the personnel. We had successful reporters, but no successful programs. It will not be possible for any of us to repeat that growth in the future, but it is possible for someone to bring it down. Faking something, lying to the viewer, being sloppy or careless with the facts, falling into one of the traps that beset the last-minute production, above all, not thinking about the consequences of what you do, will hurt us all, will undo the work of men and women whose efforts built this division and gave you the chances you now enjoy. Be as protective of our reputation as those of us who built it, and it will sustain you.
We take a moment every week to ground ourselves, center ourselves, and bring the whole of ourselves into this time of worship. This week, as part of the meditation and grounding, we will have a gift from our choir who's with us today. And so as we enjoy a moment of silence with one another, the choir will now come forward and lead us in our meditation.
Thank you for indulging me in that. I really enjoyed that Nick Palmer stuff. Really, anyway. And, you know, it is pretty much the perfect piece for this topic. I also have to get out of the way right away for a little joke that you can't spell truth without Ruth, right? So. All right, so now we've got that done. We can talk about what I meant to talk about. Okay, truth is a complex topic. Without getting too academic, we can say there are at least three kinds of truth. There's objective truth, provable data, like, you know, the sky is blue. But what's provable data exactly? The sky is blue? Yeah. Well, all right. On a clear day, the light waves our eyes take in from unobstructed sky are interpreted by human brains as a color that we've agreed to call blue. Right? Then there's what they call normative truth. That's things we agree on as a society or a culture, right? Like, say, killing is wrong. Okay, killing's wrong, but killing what? Food animals? Plants? Mosquitoes? Mass murderers? Once upon a time, we all agreed the earth was flat, but that didn't change reality. Have extraterrestrials visited Earth? Arthur Schopenhauer said truth has three stages. First, it's ridiculed. Then it's violently opposed. And third, it's accepted as being self-evident. And that seems like a reasonable depiction of the reality of normative truth to me. And then we get to subjective truth. That's your truth and my truth. And this is the rabbit hole we all fall deeper into every day. We can try to figure out truth by looking at its opposite. Lies, okay. If you're saying something you believe is not true, and you're saying it to persuade somebody else to believe it, that's a lie. I'll give you a moment. You can fill in your own favorite from the last couple of weeks. The word propaganda gets used a lot lately, and I don't think we've been careful enough about what that means. It's presenting information, regardless of its truth, specifically to advance a political or another power-related agenda. The media are accused of it all the time. I believe some media outlets are actively engaged in it, and I bet you do too, although we might not agree about which ones. We are hearing lots of propaganda, and we're hearing it from other sources. People are telling lies to big audiences for political power, and I believe it's happening more now than at any other time in the really recent, in our lives probably. And you know, and this is the point at which it is not in the order it's supposed to be here. Okay. Anyway. I do believe it's really important to understand when we're hearing propaganda and when we're hearing something else, and to make a distinction. I spent a lot of my professional life in pursuit of truth, or some of its relatives, reality, accuracy, fairness. I worked for more than 20 years at ABC News in New York. Some of you might be thinking lamestream right now. When I chose my reading, I was thinking you might be interested in the degree to which truth-telling is defined for us as journalists in the lamestream media for everyday use in a normal workday. Those binders and those books are things, those are everywhere in the newsroom, and we had a list of hundreds more, what we called standard operating procedures, that helped us figure out how to tell a story in the normal course of a day. They were referred to all the time, daily, sometimes hourly. There's very strict language about topics like, you know, can you call something a riot? How do we describe people who support the right to an abortion or the right to oppose it, or people who oppose it? I'm not certain now what kind of language they allow, but I can tell you that for many, many years we did not say pro-life or pro-choice. When I worked at ABC, there were at least half a dozen people working in a department called Standards and Practices. Their only job was thinking about those kinds of questions and how to apply them to the news stories that we were trying to tell. I can't tell you how many people did that at the other networks or how many are there now, but I can tell you that number is not 0. Because most media companies do not like being sued about these things. Even Fox News has figured that out now. But we weren't just thinking about avoiding lawsuits. We were trying to do things right. We didn't want to mix up objective truth, normative truth, and subjective truth, and we knew that subjectivity is inescapable. We all have our own histories and cultures and experiences, both as individuals and as organizations, and we all have our own motivations. Motivations are really important to understanding whether you're hearing truth or lies or untruth or propaganda or something else. Media companies want to make money. That's their job, making money. But how to do that is not so simple. If you say what your current audience wants to hear, you might not be drawing in a new audience. If you say something really, really provocative to try to get a new audience, how are you going to keep them? Are you going to be able to keep being endlessly provocative and keep drawing in new? It's a dark, dark road. Getting ideas out to an audience is a lot easier than it used to be, right? So there's a lot more people trying to find and keep an audience, and there are more ways of monetizing it. The lamestreamers try to tell better stories in a better way. Seriously. When I worked at radio, in a radio newsroom, we had hundreds of local stations in virtually every market in the country. Those station managers were always listening to the competition. Some of them, we won't go into the depths of broadcasting and why this was true, but some of them had the ability to make choices on a daily or even an hourly basis whose newscast they were going to run, us or the competition. And if they didn't air our newscasts, our commercials weren't airing, and so we didn't make money. These stations, these hundreds of stations all over the country they all have different audiences and different formats. So it's not like you could just say, all right, we're going to tell stories like this or stories like that, and that'll keep all of the stations happy. Well, everybody will tune in because, like, everybody is really wildly interested in agricultural news, right? Or industrial news, or the, Ford, the auto companies, or, No. In order to try to keep all of those affiliates happy, we were trying to be objectively better. We were trying for something more accurate, something told from the scene as vividly as possible. So we've actually spoken to people, and we're not just telling you what they said, we're letting you hear them, and we're trying to do it faster. There's no time for coordinated messaging. People think that the networks coordinate with each other about this sort of thing. We had 7 deadlines an hour. We were not talking to the other networks about how we were going to approach a story. We were just trying to get it on the air faster, better, more vividly. And we were not engaged in propaganda. This was not a coordinated effort to maintain power. It just wasn't. You just have to take my word for that. We were trying to make a better product in order to make more money. But that is not to say the system doesn't sometimes end up perpetuating myths or untruths, and it definitely tends to perpetuate the current power structure. But mistakes. They're not lies or propaganda. Are they truth? Also no. What about telling the story as you know it, even if you don't have all the facts? Okay, that's pretty much the definition of breaking news. You've probably heard journalism described as the first draft of history. And let's be really clear that it's often a very rough draft. But in that context, responsible journalists try to overcome that by spending a lot of time telling you where and how they got the information they're giving you. Attribution, attribution, attribution. The sheriff said in a news conference that the neighbors told me they saw. But again, that is not to say that there weren't and aren't giant holes in our efforts to be good journalists. I'm a member of a couple of Facebook groups for former ABCers. There's a surprising number of those groups out in the world. For broadcasters in general, I'm sure the print journalists have them too. They're full of photographs of people and gear. You'd be amazed how many pictures of old tape machines are on Facebook right now. And there are little bits of ephemera people have saved. Of course, this is all about nostalgia. People reminisce about Peter Jennings as a reporter in Beirut, Ted Koppel in Vietnam. Those are both before my time, by the way. Or a little more recently, Sam Donaldson as the White House correspondent. Anyway, a series of posts not all that long ago consisted of old rosters of reporters and bureaus from various eras. One was from about the time I graduated from high school, so that was only a few years before I was working at ABC. I remember my early days there really well. It was so impressive to me. Those people seemed really important. They wore suits to work. Most of them wore ties too because most of them were men. Anyway, that roster had roughly 100 people on it, and exactly 6 were women. I think 2 were people of color. I'm not certain about one of them. And one of those was also a woman. ABC had a couple of dozen bureaus, but there were none in South America, and the only one that was in Africa really had to be called Middle Eastern. Many Facebookers went on and on about how great those days were, and I know people were trying hard to tell the truth, and they told some important stories. Watergate, for example, was certainly a legitimate story that was told by and about white guys in Washington. But what stories did we miss? There must have been things happening on those 2 continents we weren't really covering at all. And what about women? Do we think they had anything going on in the 20th century? So do you even know when you don't have all the facts? How do you know what you don't know? What about telling a story you know, even if you aren't part of the community involved? Can white people tell stories about people of color? Can cisgender people talk about queer people? And if not, is it okay for major media outlets to ignore those stories if they don't have the right people available to report on them? I was inspired to talk about truth by our oratorio concert piece, Considering Matthew Shepard. Many of you attended the concert. A whole bunch of you sang in it. And even if you weren't there, you probably know who Matthew Shepard was. He was a young gay man who lived in Wyoming and became famous because he was brutally beaten, strung up on a fence, and left to die. This was 1998, and I had a senior editorial job at ABC then. The people who did the beating said at the time that they lured Matt into their truck with the intention of robbing him, but that he made a sexual advance, and they freaked out about that. Gay panic. It was a horrible beating. The man who found Matt, still alive, said he was so unrecognizable he first thought he was seeing a scarecrow. Matt's face was said to be completely covered in blood except for the tracks of his tears. That's the story we knew when the killing happened. The crime inspired outrage and demonstrations all around the world, actually. But our beloved choir director, Austin Williams, wanted us to take a different approach to this piece. His approach was based on a different understanding, and he spent part of nearly every rehearsal reading to us from later accounts of the crime. Over time, a different version of the story had taken shape. Matt and his killers knew each other. People had seen them together. They were all meth users, and to some extent, at least meth dealers. By the time they got to court, his killers were telling different stories. And later in jail interviews, Aaron McKinney, who's believed to be the one who did the actual beating, said he was on a meth bender, he hadn't slept for days, and implied he wasn't really in his right mind when it happened. So in the course of this choral re-examination of the story, we heard that meth use was common in Midwestern gay culture, at least at that time. And there was an implication that the media probably should have understood that drugs were involved. Did the media utterly fail on the Matthew Shepard story? We do have a responsibility to look beyond the surface, but we heard the gay hate crime story from the perpetrators themselves, from Matt's friends, and from some of the perpetrators' friends. And it made some sense that way. I mean, it gave us a way to try to understand what happened. We know now that those people who all told us the same story had entirely different reasons for telling it. And by the way, that version of the story had a truth of its own. A lot of the legislation that, at least for the moment, protects the LGBTQIA community was inspired by it. And another sort of slight aside that I think is important, when an incident takes on a life of its own, the way this story does, the storytellers start to lose control over the story. The public decides for themselves what they want to believe, and the truth doesn't always play as big a role as we would want it to. So we can say now that it's a truer story that all three young men had more or less traumatic childhoods, and they were influenced by the economics and addictive qualities of methamphetamine. But I'm not sure that that's a story that we could have told in real time. It would have been irresponsible in the extreme for any reporter to go to anyone and say, well, this was a gay man, he must have been taking drugs, right? I mean, who would you ask that question of? Would that have been appropriate in any setting at all? Or should we have said they're not very successful people? Did some of them have absent parents? Is that why this happened? Is that an assumption that we could be making? Is that something we could have been talking about in real time? What if we don't have a reporter who has the experience and expertise to be an expert in this area? I can assure you that ABC does not now and did not then have a beat that focuses on the gay male experience in small towns and flyover states. We were never going to have a reporter in Laramie who could have told us that these young men knew each other and some had had sex with each other and they all participated in selling and using meth. So should we not have told the story? That was not really an option. We saw a story that looked both engaging and important. It looked like an opportunity to use our position of power to amplify the voices of the underrepresented. So what do you do if you see an important story, but you can only tell it imperfectly? And really, what does it mean to tell it perfectly? Some of this re-understood story is based on a jailhouse interview of Aaron McKinney in 2004. The story he told at that point was that he had planned to steal $10,000 from a drug dealer, but that didn't work out. And then he saw Matthew Shepard looking prosperous and went after him instead. He took the $30 that was in Matt's wallet and he got carried away beating him because he was in a meth rage. That version still doesn't account for all the evidence and the other narratives that we have about what happened. And given what we know, I think we have to believe that even Aaron McKinney and Russell Henderson don't really know what happened anymore, if they ever really did. Research shows that people under stress are not good at forming memories. I was in a boat accident years ago with my then brother-in-law and two of my nephews. We were in a canoe with a little trolling motor, and we hit the wake of another boat at a bad angle. We were in deep water. My nephews were 2.5 and 12. There are certain things about the incident that we all agree on with no trouble. But we were all under considerable stress, and we all had different personal needs about how to understand what had happened to us. Even that same evening, after we got safely to shore and we warmed up and calmed down, we found that we were telling slightly different versions of the story. And the memories that we formed about it were based on those stories we told each other and the stories we heard from each other. We've all told the story in other contexts a number of times, and we all have different recollections of it today, probably more different than they were at the time. You go over these things in your mind and you try to make sense of what happened. Sometimes you have important realizations, and sometimes you just end up making things up to make it make some kind of sense. So let's go back to Emily Dickinson. Tell all the truth, but tell it slant. The truth must dazzle gradually. Literary scholars sometimes say this is Christian allegory. The reality of God is too much for us, too bright for our infirm delight, as she says. And we have to see it in pieces through Jesus and his parables. And that might be what she meant. But for me, I think truth is just too hard to see straight on. It's too complicated, and we all bring our own truth to the discussion. I'm not saying we should give the major media a pass on bad reporting because they're trying hard. But what I think about this is that we all have a responsibility to do the best storytelling we can and also the best story hearing. We should all be good reporters and seek out as much information as we can, and we should also all recognize that what we're telling about the truth is a sort of sideways glance at it. I've asked a lot of questions in the course of this because they're really hard questions and I don't really know the answers. So I hope your takeaway might be that the closest we get to truth would be a good faith effort to understand more than our first glance at things.
Thank you, Ruth. Friends, we take time each week to embody love and truth and goodness in our world through the collection of our gifts. We take the offering, and when that offering is taken, 50% of it, of course, stays here to continue our ministries and our legacy of justice and love and worship and beauty. And 50% goes directly out into the community in the form of social action grants and social action funds, causes and organizations and other things that can amplify our gifts and spread love and truth and justice through the world. And so in the spirit of love and in the spirit of truth, the offering will now most graciously be received. may be seated. We have several announcements today, so you can tell that things are starting to get a little closer to the church year. First off, will you please join me once again in thanking Ruth for her words with us today? Thank you. Thank you. And of course, thank you so much to Phil Pletcher for your gifts. It's been a while since I've had to say this, but huge thank you to our choir. Thank you. Volunteer group. Thank you. What a treat. And of course, our Religious Services Committee and our AV staff who really make this thing flow and go through the summer. A huge thank you to all of them. Thank you. Thank you. We are blessed. Friends, after this service, you are encouraged to say hello to Ruth and anybody else, and also go to the social hall for a moment, grab a cup of coffee or tea, and just mingle, enjoy one another's company before going on with our day. I do hope to see you there. We have an announcement that's coming in a couple of weeks. On August 27th, there will be a gathering that starts in the chapel after the service that day. And this is specifically a series of listening circles and conversations around childcare in Kent County. Fountain Street is deeply involved with Together West Michigan. And one of those pillar issues that they are looking at is the childcare, it'd be fair to say, crisis in Kent County. Many of us who either have children or grandchildren or neighbors know that there's a huge shortage of childcare here, and it puts an undue burden on many people, including our own church members who have to deal with this. So Meredith Bradley and Claudia Bajema are the 2 point people for this conversation, and you will be invited to that. It'll be 11:15 on August 27th. Look for more information in the Beat. Additionally, we'll be sending out a thing this week for everybody, just updating you all on who's the who of the Fountain Street staff. We've had a big, busy summer pulling together our staff for the coming year. Austin McWilliams, our choir director, has successfully hired 4 section leaders, and so that's going to be a big piece of our musical ministries this year, as well as some new organist accompanists that I'm excited to introduce you to. So we'll be sending out a guide that kind of says who's who, what do you need to know about them, and almost as equally important, what do you need to know about what they do here? So I know many people wonder those things. Friends, as we go forth from this place, I leave you with the simple blessing offered to us by St. Francis. Go out and preach the gospel of love, and when necessary, use your words. Go in peace. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.